The news broke like a clap of thunder on a clear day. Jean-Pierre Dubois, the wealthiest man in France, had publicly provoked Pope Leo the Fourteenth. Dubois wasn't just any billionaire, he was a man known as the Secularist, a figure of cold, hard logic who had built an empire on technology, media, and high fashion. To him, the church was a beautiful fossil, a charming piece of history perhaps, but ultimately irrelevant, powerless. Speaking on his own television network, his words dripped with a calm, dismissive arrogance. He announced that he had requested a private audience at the Vatican. "I am not going as a pilgrim," he said, a thin smile playing on his lips. "I am going to discuss business, to make a proposal." He suggested quite openly that the church was a bankrupt institution, spiritually and financially, that it needed the sharp logic of the modern marketplace to save it from itself. And he, Jean-Pierre Dubois, was flying to Rome to offer that salvation. The media, most of which he owned, immediately framed the narrative. It was the showdown everyone had been waiting for. The future versus the past. The man of data versus the man of faith. The world saw it as an obvious, cynical trap, a public relations stunt designed to humiliate the Pope. And that is why the world was stunned when the Vatican's response came. Pope Leo the Fourteenth had calmly accepted the meeting. "But before we dive in, tell me where you're watching us from, and may God bless you wherever you are. Now, let's begin." The private audience was held in a simple, wood-paneled study, far from the grand halls of gold and marble. The room was filled only with books and the quiet weight of centuries. Jean-Pierre Dubois entered, not with the humility of a guest, but with the confidence of an inspector. His suit was a marvel of modern tailoring, sharp, grey, and minimalist. He looked like a man who had stepped out of a magazine about the future. Pope Leo the Fourteenth, in his simple white cassock, looked timeless, like a man who was not impressed by such things. He greeted Dubois with a simple nod, his eyes calm and observant. Dubois did not waste time on pleasantries. He did not come for blessings. "Your Holiness," he began, his voice smooth and precise, "let us be frank, we are both men who understand legacy. The difference is that your legacy is crumbling, mine is being built." He walked to the window, looking out over St. Peter's Square. "The 21st century is not run by prayer. It is run by data, it is run by capital, it is run by media influence. These are the true powers that shape the human experience. Faith is a lovely comfort, like poetry, but it does not solve real-world problems. It is, if you will, irrelevant to human progress." The Pope listened, his hands folded on his lap. Showing no offense, no anger, he simply waited. Dubois turned from the window, a look of almost surgical pity on his face. "I am here to make a business proposal, a generous one." He placed a sleek, impossibly thin tablet on the Pope's ancient wooden desk. "Your archives, your library, it is the history of the Western world, and it is rotting. It is inaccessible, it is dying." He tapped the screen, showing a complex projection. "I propose to save you. My company will fund and execute the complete digitization of every book, every manuscript, every artifact in your possession. We will preserve it forever in the cloud." "A noble offer," the Pope said quietly. "But there is a condition, I presume?" Dubois smiled. "Of course, a simple one. In recognition of this gift, this salvation, I will be named the chief patron curator of the Vatican archives, and the Vatican will issue an official statement, a simple acknowledgement that it was modern, secular logic, my logic, that was required to save the Church's history from its own decay." The arrogance of the offer hung in the air. He was not offering to help, he was offering to purchase the Church's narrative, treating the Pope of all Christendom as little more than a failed museum curator, begging for a handout. Pope Leo the Fourteenth listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not debate the billionaire's cold logic. He did not rise to defend the faith against the charge of being irrelevant. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, almost sorrowful patience. When Dubois finally finished his presentation, the silence in the room felt heavy. The Pope, a man who commanded the loyalty of 1 billion souls, seemed completely unfazed by the titan of industry standing before him. Then, with a soft voice that cut through the billionaire's metallic confidence, the Pope spoke. "It is a fascinating proposal, Monsieur Dubois. You offer to save our history, to encase it in digital amber." He shook his head very slowly. "But I must decline." Dubois raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Decline? May I ask why? It is a gift, no cost." "You are mistaken about the cost," the Pope replied gently. "You see, the true heritage of the Church is not in the paper or the ink. It is in the souls that those words have touched, and the soul, monsieur, cannot be digitized." Dubois let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of humor, but of pure mockery. "The soul," he scoffed. Your Holiness, that is a beautiful poetic concept. But it has no market value. It is an abstract. I am talking about tangible reality. The Pope ignored the mockery. He did not defend the word. Instead, his gaze sharpened, and his focus became so intense that Dubois felt, for the first time, a chill. The atmosphere in the room changed. The power had shifted. Jean-Pierre, the Pope said, his voice quiet but carrying a new immense weight. Tell me, how is the orchard in Avignon? Do you still remember the smell of the almonds, the ones that belonged to Luc? The effect of those words was immediate and devastating. The blood drained from Jean-Pierre Dubois' face, the man who controlled global markets, who could build or break companies with a single word, suddenly looked fragile. His perfect, arrogant composure shattered like glass. The name Luc was a ghost, a phantom he had buried under 4 decades of success, a name he never ever expected to hear inside the walls of the Vatican. What did you say? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Luc, the Pope repeated, his voice filled not with accusation but with a profound sadness. You have not thought of him in a long time, but I am told he thought of you until the very end. Pope Leo the 14th stood up, not in judgment, but as a storyteller, a keeper of memory. He began to narrate a story. There were 2 young men, 40 years ago, on a small, windswept almond farm not far from Avignon. They were inseparable, brothers in all but blood. Dubois was frozen, his breathing shallow. One, the Pope continued, was brilliant with numbers and business. He was ambitious. He saw the world as a thing to be conquered. That was you, Jean-Pierre. The other was brilliant with the earth. He was quiet, gentle, a man of simple faith. His name was Luc. His passion was not for money, but for life. He was a botanist, taught by the monks at the local abbey. The Pope looked at Dubois with knowing eyes. And Luc made a discovery. After years of patient work, he crossbred an almond seed that was a miracle. A seed that could resist the worst droughts, that could grow in poor soil where nothing else would, a seed that could help feed millions of hungry people in the driest parts of the world. It was his life's work. The billionaire's hands began to tremble. Luc trusted you, the Pope said, his voice soft but relentless. He showed you his miracle. You saw the potential not to feed the hungry, but to build an empire. You told your friend you would find investors, find funding for a great humanitarian project. The Pope paused, letting the weight of the memory settle. Instead, you took his research. You took his seeds. You convinced him to sign papers he didn't understand, and you patented his discovery in your own name. You didn't use it to feed the poor, did you, Jean-Pierre? You discovered that the oil from this miracle almond was the most potent anti-aging moisturizer ever found. You used it to create l'huile d'Avignon, the basis of your first billion, the foundation of your entire cosmetics empire. The Pope's voice dropped to a whisper. And Luc, betrayed, with no proof and no money to fight you. He lost the family farm. The bank took everything. He died a few years later, penniless, alone, and heartbroken. Not because he lost a fortune, but because his gift from God, meant to feed the hungry, was being sold for hundreds of euros a bottle to make the rich look younger. Dubois exploded. The image of the cold, logical billionaire vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. Lies! That is a fabrication, slander! He shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet study. He pointed a trembling finger at the Pope. This is blackmail. You run an intelligence agency, not a church. How dare you? How could you possibly know this? He is dead. It is my word against a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. He was losing control, and he knew it. Pope Leo the 14th did not flinch at the outburst. He waited patiently for the rage to subside, his expression one of deep sorrow. It is not blackmail, Jean-Pierre. We do not deal in such things here, he said, his voice remaining impossibly calm. And it was not a ghost who told me. It was a man who heard the confession of Luc's dying breath, a man who gave your friend his last rites. The Pope paused. His old parish priest, Father Antoine. Dubois froze. He remembered the old priest, a kind, simple man who always smelled of incense and old books. Father Antoine, he's been gone for decades. He is not gone, the Pope corrected gently. He is here. He is 93 years old. He is frail, and his mind wanders. But his memory of Luc is as clear as this very day. He lives in the monastery on our grounds, spending his last days in prayer. The Pope explained that Father Antoine had been troubled for 40 years, not by what Luc had confessed, but by the injustice he had suffered. When he heard that Jean-Pierre Dubois, the boy from his parish, was coming to the Vatican to challenge the Pope, he believed it was a sign from God. He felt he could not go to his grave carrying the burden of his silence. He did not betray the seal of confession, Jean-Pierre, the Pope clarified. Luc did not confess this as a sin. He spoke of it as his sorrow. And he left something with the priest, his final letter, a letter he wrote to you but never had the courage or the money to send. The Pope opened a simple wooden box on his desk and took out a single yellowed folded piece of paper. "Father Antoine has kept it all these years. He gave it to me yesterday and he asked me to give it to you." Dubois stared at the letter as if it were a serpent. He wouldn't touch it. "It proves nothing," he whispered. "It proves everything," the Pope said softly, "because it contains the promise, the one you made, just the two of you, under the great olive tree on the hill behind his farmhouse. The day he finally perfected the seed." The Pope looked down at the letter. He writes, "My friend Jean-Pierre, do not forget our vow. This seed is a gift from God. We will give it to the hungry, not sell it to the vain. It is our promise to him under the olive tree. Do you remember that promise, Jean-Pierre?" Dubois made a small, choking sound. He staggered back and fell heavily into his chair. His mask of logic, his empire of wealth, his secular arrogance, it all crumbled to dust. He was just a boy from Avignon, being reminded of the moment he chose to break his own soul. Jean-Pierre Dubois sat utterly broken. He was a man who prided himself on logic, on seeing the world in stark, profitable numbers. But there was no number he could place on the shame that now crushed him. He stared at the floor, waiting for the final blow, the threat, the demand for money, for power, for the public humiliation he deserved. But it did not come. Pope Leo the 14th did not gloat. He did not press his advantage. He walked over to the desk, picked up the yellowed letter, and gently placed it on the table in front of the billionaire. "This is not a weapon, Jean-Pierre. It is a map showing you the way back to the man you were supposed to be." The Pope spoke with a quiet authority. "You came here to talk business, so let us talk business. You have an outstanding debt. It is not to the Vatican, it is not to me, it is a debt of the soul, a debt owed to Luke, and it is 40 years past due." Dubois looked up, his eyes hollow. What do you want?" "I want nothing," the Pope replied, "but justice requires reparation. You cannot bring Luke back. You cannot undo the pain you caused, but you can honor the life he lived and the dream he died for. You can pay the debt." The Pope's voice was firm, not with anger, but with moral clarity. He then laid out his terms, not as a negotiation, but as the only path forward. "First, you will create the Luke Foundation. Its sole purpose will be to take the original, true design of his miracle seed and use it to fight hunger, starting in the driest nations of Africa. You will fund it not with scraps, but with the full power of your wealth." The Pope leaned closer. "But that is not enough. You cannot feed the poor with one hand while profiting from the betrayal with the other. Therefore, second, you will sell your cosmetics empire, all of it, the entire division built on Luke's stolen miracle, and all the proceeds from that sale will go directly to the foundation." Dubois gasped. That is my legacy. That is everything." "It is his legacy, not yours," the Pope corrected him gently. "You have a choice, Jean-Pierre. It is not between being exposed or being safe. Your secret is safe with me and with God. The choice is simpler. You can leave this room, keep your billions, and live out your days as the richest man in the cemetery, haunted by the ghost of your friend. Or you can finally, after 40 years, honor the sacred promise you made to him under that olive tree. The choice is between your money and your soul." The press corps waited like wolves. The meeting had lasted hours. When the door to the study finally opened, the man who emerged was unrecognizable. The sharp, arrogant, cynical billionaire who had walked in, ready for combat, was gone. In his place was a man who looked hollowed out, ashen-faced, and visibly shaken. His eyes, usually so sharp and dismissive, were red-rimmed and unfocused. He walked right past the throng of reporters, ignoring their shouted questions. "Monsieur Dubois, what happened? Did the Pope accept your offer? Did you make a deal?" He said nothing. He didn't even seem to see them. He got into his car, a ghost leaving his own exorcism, and vanished, leaving behind a baffled and frantic media. In the weeks that followed, the Dubois empire began to tremble, but not from a hostile takeover or a market crash. It trembled from within. Jean-Pierre Dubois, a man who lived in the media spotlight, vanished. Interviews were cancelled. Public appearances were scrubbed. His media outlets, famous for their secular anti-church slant, suddenly went quiet. The attacks stopped. The mocking articles disappeared. The financial world went into a panic. What had the Pope said to him? What leverage could that quiet old man possibly have over the most powerful logical mind in France? Rumors flew, but no one knew the truth. Then he was spotted, not in Paris or New York or at a high-stakes board meeting. A local villager near Avignon, one who remembered him as a boy, took a photograph. It showed Jean-Pierre Dubois, dressed not in a bespoke suit but in simple clothes, standing alone in a dead, overgrown field. It was the remains of Luke's family farm. The photo went viral. Another showed him sitting for hours under a gnarled ancient olive tree on the hill, the very one the Pope had mentioned. The world watched, stunned, as the man of cold logic confronted the ruins of his past, finally terribly alone with his conscience. The announcement, when it came, shocked the world far more than his initial provocation. Jean-Pierre Dubois held a press conference, not in his gleaming Paris tower, but from a simple desk live-streamed to the world. He looked older, tired, but for the first time, at peace. He announced that he was selling his entire cosmetics and luxury division, effective immediately. He then announced the creation of the Luke Foundation, an organization dedicated to using his friend's original seed technology to combat famine. He was endowing it with 90% of his personal fortune. But it was his next words that stopped the world. He did not couch it in legal terms. He confessed. He told the stunned reporters about his profound moral debt to his childhood friend Luke. He spoke of his betrayal, of building an empire on a promise he had broken. The secular world that had idolized him as a bastion of logic was speechless. They watched their hero, a man who believed only in numbers, admit to the crippling weight of a sin. Jean-Pierre Dubois did not suddenly become a religious man. He did not start attending Mass, but the world witnessed a transformation that was deeper than any public conversion. He dedicated the rest of his life not to accumulating more, but to repairing the past. He used his business acumen to make the foundation a stunning success. Feeding millions. The man who once lived to prove his own brilliance now worked to honor the brilliance of his forgotten friend. Back in Rome, Pope Leo the Fourteenth read the news, not with triumph, but with a quiet nod. He went to the chapel and prayed. The greatest shock of the story was not that the Pope knew a dark secret. It was that the truth, spoken with simple moral authority, could find the one crack in the armor of the most logical, cynical man in the world. The Pope had not won a debate. He had not proven God's existence with logic. He had simply, and miraculously, reminded a lost soul of the promise it had made and shown it the long road back home.